Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, that mic works really well. Okay, cool. So my name is Jake Charapica. I am the manager of young adult services here at the Bratt, which means I do mostly teen programs, but occasionally I get to partner with my coworker, Emily Levine, who does adult programs and do amazing things that cross over, like Indie Video Game Festival. So thank you so much for coming out this year. This is our second time doing this event. It is going to be an annual event here at the Bratt. We're really excited to be able to offer fun talks and spaces for our amazing local devs to just show off what they're doing. Before I talk more about the event, I did want to mention, if you got our flyer, I'm trying to pull out a copy here. If you got a copy of our flyer, there is a purple QR code which has a full list with links to all of the games being featured here. So if you wanted to find more information, it's a couple days from now, you can't remember, use that QR code that's also on the event page. And then also important, we have a black QR code here. This is the library survey. So if you love this event, if you want to keep seeing it here, take a little bit of time, fill this out, because this goes a long way for me being able to continue to justify taking our amazing spaces for an entire day here. So do me a favor if you get a chance and fill it out, and we would really appreciate that. So without further ado, I just
And actually, somebody could probably hack a chatbot, like an AI chatbot, to fill out like 1,000 surveys or 10,000 surveys. I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying you could, and that would help. So.
I didn't endorse that.
Me neither. I was
all.
just thinking out loud.
So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our talk this Indie Game Festival. We have Chris Bratt from People Make Games, who came all the way from England to just come here for our amazing event. So a big shout out to Chris.
Thank you.
And then we have Jake Solomon of Midsummer Studios, which is actually a local studio here in Baltimore, and we are going to be hearing about forming an indie studio or video game studio in 2025, and a little bit about like Baltimore video game history. So I'm not the one you want to hear from. I'm going to turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, welcome to this conversation about the realities of creating a new video game studio in, what should we call it, the present climate. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds ominous. Yeah, the present climate. Yes.
There's going to be some ominous overtones to this, but I think we'll try and find the glimmers of hope.
Always
as well.
a silver thread. Silver, is that the right word? Silver thread? Silver lining?
I was with you till you doubted yourself then. That was great.
Great.
Yeah, I'm Chris Bratt. Bratt, not press like library, think unruly child. And yeah, I've been a game journalist for...
Oh, you're a Nepo baby, right? Like you're descended from Enoch Pratt himself.
Yeah, that's...
This is all nepotism. It's classic. All right.
Yeah, I've been a game journalist for 11 years, and I'm part of a team called People Make Games. We're in a very fortunate position where we get to talk to game developers about their work for a living, which is what I'm here to do today. As the other Jake said, I'm delighted to be joined by Jake Solomon, the co-founder of Midsummer Studios. Before that, formerly of Firaxis Games, of course.
Yep. Yeah. Long time at Firaxis. I've always worked in Baltimore. I spent 23 years at Firaxis and then left and helped to found a studio with others called Midsummer.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get to all of that. And yeah, thank you for agreeing to talk about why this is all quite difficult at the moment.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. And yeah, just to get a sense of the room, who here is a game developer? And I've got a broad definition for that. Like, you don't have to be professional if you do it as a hobby. If you have made a game, okay, cool. So maybe like 2/3 of the room. Who?
Look at all those nerds out there.
Yeah.
Unite!
And who is maybe thinking about doing some game development later down the line? Anyone? Okay, smattering, nice. And who's here just because they care about games and want to hear more about it? Good, me too, I'm in that category.
Right.
Nice. If you didn't put your hand up then, I'm not sure why you're here, but thank you. Appreciate it. And yes, before we get into the questions themselves, there is going to be some time for a Q&A at the end of this conversation. So if you find yourself thinking, why didn't you ask that obvious question? Well, these questions suck. You'll get the chance to remedy that.
That's right. We'll answer anything. I don't care. You can ask anything.
But yeah,
this isn't being streamed, is it? Oh, it is, actually. Never mind. I won't answer anything.
Yeah, so before we get into the sort of main first of this conversation and what it's like starting a new studio, let's talk about those 23 years you spent at
Yeah.
Firaxis. So I think you've just actually celebrated 25 years.
25.
this
May
business?
15th was my 25th year making games, living in Baltimore and making games. Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I just had my 25th wedding anniversary this past weekend.
Wow.
So,
Hey.
yeah.
And anything else to do with the number 25? That's it.
I mean, yeah. I think it's typical. It's like a pretty big trend. Like, whenever I find something I like, I just stick with it.
Nice.
But yeah, I moved out here in 2000, started at Firaxis, and got married like 3 weeks later. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, yeah. So
I didn't meet them out here, just to be clear. I had known them for a little bit longer than Firaxis.
So yeah, 23 years at that one company. Should we just run through some of the games that you will have touched whilst you were working there then? So do you wanna
Sure,
give
I
me
would
the
love
list?
to.
Obviously,
Yeah.
you're best known for being the creative director on the XCOM series.
Yes.
Of which
Yep.
there's
Yeah. XCOM, my personal favorite game growing up, and then I got the opportunity to make at Firaxis under Sid. So yeah, the XCOM franchise is probably what I'm most known for.
So that was
Oh man, does that make? Yeah, you always wonder about that, right? When you're known for something in the past, you're like, you know what you're best known for? That thing from 10 years ago, like, yeah.
That must be like one of the. I feel like that must be one of the first things on your Wikipedia page. Is
Yeah,
XCOM.
sure.
Yeah.
It
And
beats
it's
the
it's a good one.
alternative of
Yeah.
people being like, I don't know what you're known for. So I'm happy to have that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the XCOM reboot series. There's Enemy Unknown, Enemy Within, XCOM 2, and War of the Chosen.
War of the Chosen, yeah. That was my last one. Yep.
Yeah, and then Midnight Suns more recently.
Yep, Marvel's Midnight Suns. That came out at the end of 2022. Yep.
And then outside of that, when you first started at Firaxis, you were involved with the Civilization.
I started, all right, so the Civilization series, I don't know if anybody's going to know, but Civ 3, right? That was the first game I worked on. At my, here we go, all right. That's about what it deserves, like a woo, all right. A single woo from the distance. But yeah, Civ 3 was the first game I'd ever worked on. In fact, so we had my anniversary party was last weekend, and of course Sid was there. And so Sid and I still see Sid very regularly, Sid Meier. I mean,
It doesn't
I hope
feel
people
right.
know Sid Meier,
See,
right?
I can't just say his first name. It has to be Sid Meier whenever I say it.
Yeah. No. Only a few of us are allowed to say
Right,
Sid.
okay, yeah.
No. No, but I'm fortunate to still see Sid pretty regularly, and he was at my anniversary party, and so for a while there I sat with Sid and Susan, his wife, and we were talking about, because he was like, I don't remember, how did this whole thing start? So yeah, I interviewed with Sid, and I took the job there, and I started on Civ 3, and then the next thing I made was just Sid and I were the programmers on a game called Sim Golf.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that also. I'm shocked that anybody remembers Sim Golf, but yeah, then Sid and I worked on Sim Golf together, and then after that, yeah, I worked on, like Pirates. Then I worked with Sid for the rest until I made XCOM. I kind of worked for Sid for the rest of the career.
Yeah, you've talked to me before in previous interviews about that. He seems like he's been quite a mentor figure for you in that role. You could go into his office, sit on a chair, and tell him your game design problems. And
Yeah.
the wisdom of Sid Meier.
Yeah, Sid has always been a mentor to me. I always sort of, we're very different people. He's this wonderful, he's a fairly quiet guy, actually. He's a genius, so that's also how we're different. He's very smart, well-spoken. I'm a little bit loud, a little whatever, but we see really, because I think he taught me, but we see very eye-to-eye on design, so he was always, a huge influence on me.
Mm-hmm. And so 23 years. I guess it's a difficult question to answer because I'm asking you to summarize.
Can I tell you a funny
sure.
story about Sid?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've got a bunch of funny stories about Sid, but
We're going to change the title of this panel.
yeah, that's all right. It's like my Tuesdays with Sid. Now, one thing that I found out recently was that the first game I played. So he made a submarine simulator in the 80s, right? Called Silent Service. All right, there we go. Man, this is a knowledgeable audience here. So I played Silent Service. But when I was describing it to Sid, I was telling him how oh man, yeah, every time I sunk an enemy sub, the game would crash. And he was like, "It's because you stole that." He was like, "That's because that's the cracked version of that game." And I was like, "Ooh, I'm sorry." He was like, "It's fine." He was like, "It's fine." But that's great that the first time I experienced the magic of Sid Meier was by somehow stealing a game. So don't steal games. It's terrible.
Still games. And yeah, so why did you stick around there for so long? 23 years in this industry feels like a really long stint at a game studio. What was it about Firaxis that spoke to you, that kept you?
Firaxis, I love Firaxis. I mean, I love Firaxis. I only left to start Midsummer because I felt really passionate about the game we're making now. But it's an incredible place. Obviously, I loved Sid. I love the people there. It was always a very warm place. It made it made the kind of games that I love. It's the only place I ever applied to out of college to work because I like strategy games. I like tactics games. And so it was just it was a great place with a great history, and you worked with great people. And so, again, I just don't have the, like my truck, which is I told you, I drive an obnoxiously large truck. I'm sorry, everybody. I was terrified about finding street parking in the city. I was like, this is just what I deserve, right? But like my truck's like 15 years old. I've been married for 25 years. I stayed at Firaxis for 23. So I don't have the what if thing in my head of like, oh, what if would this be better? I'm always like, this is good. I'm like, I like good. This is good. I'll just stay here. So I should have gone into federal government, I think. I should have just gotten like a job in federal government, and
Yeah.
I would have been thrilled.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, here it's great that, Lawrence. Did you, I talked to you in the past about XCOM being just like the series you always wanted to work on. How did that end up coming to pass? Like, at what point did you realize that would be an option? Obviously, for people who don't know, there was the original XCOM series that you were able to reboot there. Like, how did that first come to be?
So XCOM, for those who don't know, it's a game about alien invasion, where you control this elite force of soldiers defending Earth from an alien invasion. And the original came out in 1994, and it had ties to Baltimore. So the company that published it wasn't developed at Microprose, but for those who remember Microprose, which is really kind of that's the genesis for most of the industry in the Baltimore area. There's Bethesda, obviously, but all the developers in the Baltimore area, they really come out of the Microprose family. Mm-hmm. So Microprose was this great company that Sid and Bill Staley had, and Microprose published the original XCOM in 1994. I grew up in Kansas City, so I wasn't around here. I played it, and I was obsessed with it. And then it was part of the reason that I applied to work at Firaxis, because it wasn't one of Sid's games, but it was in that genre. And so, yeah, when I came to Firaxis, then once I'd worked for Sid for a while, I had this idea of, again, this is, I learned a powerful lesson here where I was working with Sid, and he and I got along really well, and he would make games, and I'd play them, and I'd give him feedback. And then every once in a while, it would be good feedback, and he'd take it. And I was like, well, seems like I'm a better designer than Sid Meier. And I was like, obviously, what I should do is make a game. Completely ignorant of the reality of what it takes to make a game. So that's kind of how it started, is that working with Sid, and I was very passionate about XCOM. So anytime there was an opportunity of the company was growing, and it was like the publisher wanted a new title, I'd be like, we should make XCOM. Mm-hmm. And eventually I got the opportunity to do it. But as I think people know, like many high-profile failures later of like making bad prototypes and bad versions of that game, then I was able to design with the team, make something that, as they say, stood the test of time.
Yeah.
In Firaxis, is that outside of Firaxis? Do people know like games that stand the test of time? It's a very Firaxis thing to say, because that was the slogan for Civ, right? Mm-hmm. Make something to stand the test of time. So
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I feel like when I've interviewed in the past, you find it easier to sometimes to talk about the mistakes, I think, than
those are way more fun.
The successes. So I'm glad that you can at least say that it's stood the test of time.
Yeah.
It's one of the reboot series, one of my all-time favorite group of games. So
it's a real challenge being a developer. and it's such a blessing. But I think of who's the blue guy from The Watchmen?
Oh, Dr.
Okay.
Manhattan. Thank you. Thank you.
Why did
was
I
gonna say
know
that-
this audience would have 400? Thank you. I knew it was Dr. Manhattan. But I wanted it to be audience participation. No, I think of myself as, in a perfect world, there's like a multiverse where I'm still making XCOM. You know, what would I be on now? Well, games take forever now. XCOM, whatever. But that I'd be making Midnight Suns 2. I'd be making what we're making at Midsummer. So yeah, I love XCOM. You need a lot of time to. Games that I hate the designs of games that I've made for probably a good 5 years, and then you start designing another game, and you're like, oh God, I wish I could just go back to. I was like, how was I even good at design? You look at yourself, and like, you make something, and you're like, oh God, my best days are behind me. So then you look at your past, and you're like, that was okay. You know?
There we go. That's the
best
tone
I
I was
can say.
expecting. Did you feel the pressure at the time that XCOM had been the success that you'd hoped it would be, that it kind of launched? It was standing the test of time. Did you feel the pressure that would be your career going forwards? Like that you could be at Firaxis making that kind of game, innovating in that space for the remainder of the career?
Yeah, I again, I think it's my personality where I was like, I hope that would be like the future, right? Is like, I'd be happy. I would be thrilled, right, to make XCOM forever, probably. So, there was always pressure to, once you made it, there was always you and I have talked about this. One of the difficult things, right, as developers, as we know, I know it's kind of silly now. People who don't make games, they look at making games, and it is such a blessing to make games. I feel that every single day. I feel so lucky to be able to make games. And even if I couldn't get paid for it, I'd still do it. It's just it's something that I think probably everybody here feels strongly about. But the challenge of making games that most people don't know is that most of the time, your game is awful. Right? It's really bad, and that's extremely. And if you're the design, especially as a designer, maybe I feel this because I'm a designer, but it's extremely anxiety-inducing. It's a very difficult way to live because you rightly are responsible for it not being bad, but it is bad, and it just has to be bad for a long time. And so yeah, that is the part of the job that I think people don't understand. Is like, if you want to make a game, people go like, oh man, that must be just, sitting around and playing Mario Kart World. Has anyone played that yet? All right. Is it good? Okay.
Whoa.
It's a tough
Was not
audience
expecting
here.
that. Jeez, okay.
Give it 5 years. You'll look back on it and think fondly of it. Yeah, but that's the thing, is that I think people think it's like sitting around playing a game and having a blast, and there is so much joy in making games. Your daily life is, I think, so much more joyful than probably other careers in a lot of ways, but the challenge of it is like spending so much time with a product, a game, whatever, and you're like, this is not good. That's the tough part. I think I've always thought like that's the hardest part about making games. What the hell am I talking about? What did you ask me? Am I answering a question at this point?
Yeah, I asked
Am
you.
I just waxing
I asked
poetic
you
up here?
like how it would feel or if you felt the pressure to be working on XCOM long term. But to respond to what you just said, do you think that is more true for game designers and game developers that are working on like systems-heavy games in particular? Is that like a
Yes.
particularly difficult, or do you think that
who
would
knows,
be true to everything?
right? I don't know because I've only ever made system-based games, but that's actually a very insightful question.
Thank you.
Actually.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We rehearsed that one yesterday. But no, it is actually a very insightful question because you know what? You're right? Because if games are a little more experiential, or let's say you're making a more narrative-driven, I mean, again, if you're inventing new mechanics, sure, but if you're either using mechanics from previous games, or let's say you're making a team shooter, which isn't to say that there's harder, it's incredibly difficult in its own way, I'm sure. But yeah, you probably do have mechanics that you can immediately be like, if we can get okay, great, now it's fun, and we're gonna add twists to that. Systems-driven games, you're right, are very difficult because you gotta stand them up, and you gotta, what makes them fun in the end is what makes them difficult in development. Like, first, developing those systems, getting the interactions to be meaningful and to evoke the right emotional response or desire in the players. It just takes so long, and then get the progression systems working over the top of that. Yes, systems-driven games probably are like slower to stand up in that regard.
I think we'll find it interesting because at the end of this, my questions anyway, we're going to maybe see if we can figure out any advice for game developers in the audience. But
Yep.
your story is an interesting one. You ended up working for the one game studio you wanted to work for and ended up leading the reboot on the series that you most cared about. That's probably quite a hard thing to replicate.
Nepotism. I know, you think that I'm nepotism.
Exactly.
It's true. In that regard, I have led a very charmed life. And anybody, and I've said this, and this is probably trite because everybody's heard this, but anybody who's had any amount of success and doesn't attribute a fair amount of that to luck is lying to you, right? Luck is a huge part of success. And yeah, sure, you have to be, what is the corny statement of, it's when preparation meets opportunity, right? Success is when preparation meets opportunity. There's a fair amount of truth in all corny statements, which I think is true. But yeah, yes, you're right. Thanks for pointing out how lucky I've been, and not as a result of incredibly hard work. Thanks, Chris. Any other insightful comments you want to make? People said that Sid carried you, really. What do you say to that?
Okay, we'll move on to Baltimore more generally. You mentioned microprose is a lot of the kind of DNA of the game development scene here, traces back to that. Firaxis, I think, is just an institution for the city, and Sid Meier himself probably is an institution at this stage. Not that he carried you, I didn't say that. You've got ZeniMax, of course, as well. But like, as a visitor to the city in the States, like, what should I know about the sort of game development DNA of this place? What makes it different to other parts of the world?
I think that from a historical perspective, definitely starting with microprose. There's obviously Bethesda, which out of which comes ZeniMax, so long history there as well. But then that fostered the sort of creativity of all these different studios, from Breakaway to Firaxis to, oh gosh, I'm going to forget people now. Brian Reynolds' studio. Yeah, Big Huge. Thank you, Big Huge.
The audience is really coming in close for us, isn't
which
it?
Big Huge still exists. Oxide, which came out of Firaxis, and gosh, I should not name studios because I'm going to leave people out. Bit Reactor. There's all these studios that all have their roots, at least in the Baltimore area, in microprose. And then there's a very lively indie scene. There's a great IGDA scene here, and so yeah, there really is like a great gaming scene. There's a lot of opportunity, and it's from everything from mobile, like we had Zynga, we had all these different groups, up to AAA with Bethesda and ZeniMax and things like that. So there is this huge opportunity. And so we talk to people when we talk to either investors or you talk to press, and they go, oh, Baltimore, and they're always a little surprised. And guess what? Okay, we'll leave this to the audience here. What do you think people say when I say we're in Baltimore? What do you think they reference? This is a family show. The gosh darn Wire. It's always the first sentence out of people's mouth as they go, oh yeah, The Wire, and I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's it. That's what Baltimore. It's a great. You've got it. You got it. Not they just say The Wire. So yes, that always. It doesn't. It just cracks me up because people are like, oh, Baltimore. It doesn't matter. They can be international, whatever. The next thing will be like, oh, The Wire, and I'm like, yeah, sure. That's exactly what life here is like. So, but then people get really surprised at how this is a pretty vibrant hub for development. So I don't know what, Austin was known for being a sort of new hub. Baltimore's kind of an old hub for development, and we're still very vibrant. There's a lot of studios around here, and so, it's something I'm proud of. I love Baltimore, the city. I love the county. I love the state of Maryland. Right?
Woo!
Start pandering. I love the public library system. The unsung heroes of our public libraries. Right? And we were talking to Jake before, and this building, you just know there's secret rooms in, and he said there are 3 subfloors. I think he's full of it. I think there are 7, you know. There's a tunnel to the basilica. We all know what's going on. Anyway, sorry. What am I doing again? I'm sorry.
We're picking up the library, which I think it speaks volumes that there is an indie games fest in a place like this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going back to Brighton where I live, and I've got demands of my local library when I return. I'm expecting big things. Speaking of local games history, does anyone here remember? I'm going to butcher this. I've had to Google some of this, but the Glen Burnie Mall, like it's now a strip mall, but it used to be like a
Yeah, Glen Burnie.
And who remembers it? Anyone? Oh God, are they too young? Is this an old thing?
What's that?
The Glen Burnie Mall. Like I was expecting more people to remember it. Oh God, have I got it wrong? Where was Power Gamer?
I think that's right. Marley Station. I think that's right. Yeah.
There's a video that I think you have to watch to. It's like I see it as a key part of Baltimore's gaming history, which is Jake just before XCOM was released went undercover in a video game store to sell it to customers, and it's so good. Like it sounds like that would be terrible. I feel like it could have been terrible, but it's extremely charming.
It was one of my favorite memories. Yeah. So there was it was called Power Gamer in the mall there in Glen Burnie. Yeah, and I met like straight, like this was the county, but still like straight Baltimore characters. Mm-hmm. I mean, like there's this dude who was dressed all head to toe in like green, like all like weed themed apparel. And he was telling me how he had like an Xbox in his in the dashboard of his car. Yeah. And I was like, this dude rules. Yeah. I was like, this guy rules. True story, very true story. I did not sell a single copy of XCOM to any of those people. I could not convince a single person to buy a copy. That was pre-release. It was, yeah, I remember being a little shaken by that.
You would have actually been able to hand over a copy?
Probably not.
Okay.
But
well, that might have been the problem.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because none of them wanted it. So, which is funny because I was killing time in Westminster last night, and so I had my 2 daughters with me. I had 2 of my 3 daughters with me. And what my daughters like to do is if we go to like a mall, which are like these are like dying malls are just dying, right? In America, there's a few. But the Westminster Mall is, let me tell you, that's a real, it's a real, like, just a lot of empty storefronts. But there is a GameStop. So what my daughters love to do is, I swear this isn't me doing it, they love to go into GameStop and see if there's, like, one of the games I've worked on in there. And so they like to always find, like, XCOM or Midnight Suns or like a Funko from Midnight Suns or something like that. So if they can find one of those games, then they're always like happy. So yeah, and we found there's an XCOM collection. They found that. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Oh well, so, I think.
And then they kind of want people to know that like I worked on it, and I'm like, put it down. I'm like, put that down. Like, wouldn't the GameStop people? I'm like, they would not care one bit. I said, put that down. Put that down.
When you told me the other day that because of that in games that you worked on after XCOM, you were encouraged to maybe go and try and recreate the success of that original video.
Every time. That was the original XCOM, so that was 2012.
My gosh.
Every game I've worked on since then, the marketing department has always been like,
undercover.
Let's go back and recreate. And I'm like, are you joking? No way. That video actually, I think, is a genuinely funny slice of life video. I'm not going to ruin it by trying to recreate that. So
we'll see. We'll see if Midsummer Studios ends up going down that road.
I'll just say this real quick. It came out of one of the funniest videos ever of like, even funnier was the idea came from, it was actually Garth, our producer on the game, but it came from a guy who played for a football team, the New England Patriots, and he was like a 4th string wide receiver, and he was trying to sell his jersey to people in a store. It was like crushing to watch him. People didn't even know who he was. Oh, no. And they were like, no, thank you. And they were like big like Patriots fans with all kinds of like gear on. And he was like, do you want this? And like, I don't even know who that is. He was like, all right.
Okay. But yeah, we'll use this moment to maybe move on to Midsummer. So you left Firaxis in 2023 and co-founded a new studio. And in fact, just to, I guess, to make it a little less abstract, we actually have a few screenshots of the game that you're working on.
Which I'm happy to share with our people, Midsummer's people, Baltimore people, we've never shared screenshots before.
This is, yeah, who needs Summer Game Fest in Los Angeles?
That's right.
The Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore is the home of every true
That's right.
local video game announcement. So
That's right. So, which is it's a fun thing about being
imagine if I can't. Oh, there you go.
indie is that we get to like indie, we get to do whatever we want, right? So whenever you like share for screens and stuff like that of games you've worked on, it's a huge process, right, with a publisher. And instead, I was like, well, we can just put screenshots up, which we've never shared with anyone before. So yeah. So to talk about what people are seeing here, one of the things that the game we're making is, we call it a story simulator. So the idea is that I've always been fascinated by the idea about games about real life, right? So there are a lot of games about, and I've made games about aliens and superheroes and battle and war and combat and all that stuff. It's very interesting to me that when you think of other mediums for entertainment, so when you think of movies and shows and even music and books, the constant, the setting for those overwhelmingly is modern life. That's just the setting, because the stakes don't have to be like the world's going to explode. The stakes are very high when it's about individuals and their stories and their relationships and how their lives develop. And so to me, it's just odd that, and there are reasons for this, but it's just odd that in games, that's the least likely setting for a game, is actually modern life. And so what we wanted to do was actually make a game system-driven, like games we've made before, but actually make it about modern life, where you feel like you're living, so a life RPG or a story simulator, where by playing the game and living through this character's life, a story builds itself around you. You can make whatever choices you want, and the story builds itself around you. It's something we're really, really excited about. We love. Our artists are incredible. Like they're making this very fun, a little bit stylized, but this very fun. And that's already, some of the gameplay on here is already out of date. But that's kind of what we do. But yeah, we're making this game that it's in like adjacent to life simulators, and we call it a story simulator because we're more focused on, you know, in life simulator, they may have mechanics about, like, does your character need to eat? Do they need to take a shower? Do they need to go to the bathroom? Why haven't they gotten rid of that? I don't know. The least interesting need in The Sims, character needs to. And so instead, we are more focused on, like, the characters' emotions and what they say to each other and how they say it and how characters respond. So, yeah, it is something that I think is unlike, I can confidently say it's unlike any game out there. We're really, really excited about it.
It feels like when this was first announced, I think most people said, oh, they're working on a life sim, and it feels like you're maybe starting to move slightly away from that.
Yeah,
genre,
I think
like story simulator is what you
it's
want to say?
adjacent, but it's really much more about the story, allowing players to write story just by playing a game. So they play a game, they make choices about their characters, the relationships they want to pursue, what they want to do with their lives, and then the game writes story around that, and new characters get introduced and new characters leave, and so you're playing through a game that is writing a story around you and your choices, and yeah.
And how much of a departure, like, well, I guess, what are the through lines from those other games you've worked on? XCOM, Midnight Suns, obviously, in many ways looks very different, but like, what do you see here that has carried through from those games?
I think when people play it, they won't be shocked that the Midsummer and I, and again, a lot of Midsummer people are people that I've worked with for a long, long time. You know, there are a lot of former Firaxis people. We have new people as well, but a lot of former Firaxis people, a lot of XCOM, Midnight Suns people. And so people won't be shocked when they play. It is a system. I think you could already see. That's because I'm loud. My mic died. Nope, it's back. Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, but the light's red. What does that mean? Does that mean we're...
We can.
All right, it's fun. I'm getting louder. My mouth closer to it. Oh yeah, there we go. We can here. We can lean. Oh, jeez. All right. I think so. Yeah. Oh my God. Turned up to 11. All right. Yeah, I mean, you can already see, like, there's a bunch of resources here. You know, the idea is that these interactions are very system driven, and so it's still completely different context, completely different mechanics. It's like, again, we had to invent our own mechanics for if you want to make a game about conversation and about life and the choices you make there and make those impactful. You have to invent new mechanics, and so the mechanics are different, but it's still very system-driven. You're still making small 5-second choices, which lead to 30-second choices, which lead to bigger progression and things like that. What? I don't want to. I like this. I want to hear you yell, Chris. I've never heard you raise your voice. Has anyone ever heard Chris raise his voice? I don't believe it. Be like, that's not the done thing. To be like, oh my gosh. All right.
I've massively got the timing on this wrong because we have 50 minutes left. So I needed to get us into the actual topic of this. Sorry, I started just talking about Firaxis. That was my fault. Yeah. So this is Midsummer Studios. Started in 2023. As far as I understand, are you around 10 people at the moment? 13 people. Much different like size of team and studio than what was happening with Midnight Suns beforehand. And also, what's really different is everything's changed. We're at, like the games industry is in a significantly different moment, and there's a lot of pressure on. Well, I think on the idea of risk more generally, like what can be invested in, what games can get funding, and yeah. How did Midsummer Studios first begin, and within that framing, and how are you finding it so far? It's a weird time to start a new studio, I guess, is my main point.
Can't we just talk about all the cool stuff I did in the past? We just go back to the hits. Yeah, it's true. So there's a couple ways to fund game development. So one is, what they would call bootstrapping, right? So you pay for yourself, or your partner pays while you're making a game, and this would be the model for, like Stardew, right? The most successful version would be like Stardew Valley, right? I think that his partner worked while he worked on Stardew for like 8 years. Concerned Ape worked on it for like 8 years, made an incredible game and sold 50 billion copies, and now making a game about ghosts and chocolate. I mean, God bless him. So there's like bootstrapping, but that's obviously typically like single developer stuff. There's crowdsourcing, community funding, so Patreon or Kickstarter's not as popular of a platform anymore, but Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Patreon is probably the most popular one. Yeah, I'm French. So you tell me I subscribe to Patreon. You know what? Forget you guys. I subscribe to Patreon. How do I have the name wrong? Is it? All right. Anyways, this is over. The interview's over. All right, so Patreon, whatever you guys say. All right. So I would think you would stick with the weird pronunciation. You're British. Come on, you can't even help me out in this case? Fine. So there's that as well. But again, that limits the budget, right? You have to be making a game that can have a limited budget in that regard. So then if you want to make something that, not even to talk about like AAA development, but significant, talking about millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions of dollars. The real two ways to finance a studio are through the traditional method of publishing. So you get a publishing deal with one of the big publishers or a smaller publisher. Everything from Hooded Horse Devolver up to the EAs and the whatever Take-Twos of the world. And so that would be they pay you to hit milestones. They will continue to pay you, and they can pay you a significant amount of money, and then they'll help you market the game and probably support you for a little bit afterwards. And then there's the other model, which is probably the newest model, which is what we did at Midsummer's, which is venture capital. And so that's VC, like these funds that have a bunch of money. You pitch to them, and then they give you a big chunk of money, and they get equity in your company. So they get a chunk of your company, and it's very different. This is something I learned as we said at Midsummer. The difference between venture capital backed and as opposed to a publishing deal is the publisher wants the game to come out, and they get a revenue share, right? So your game sells copies, they get a share of the profits of that game. That's a really standard model. That's what I always was involved with at Firaxis. We were first parties. We were owned by the publisher, but and venture capital is they make an investment, and these can be. I would encourage if people are interested in game development. There are a lot of people making very small investments, so the game doesn't cost that much. These are exorbitant amounts. I know. I'm just saying from a business standpoint, $500,000 or $1 million. Venture capital can make those bets, and they'll say, all right, we'll give you this money. The way that venture capital is different, of course, is they give you the money up front, right? So we did a seed round. This was public, right? We did a seed round for $6 million in 2023. They get a chunk, they get equity in our company, so they own shares in our company. You get all the money up front, which is really, really nice because you're not tied to, and nobody can change their mind later. Like a publisher, they may change their strategy. You may not hit milestones. Venture capital doesn't work like that. They give you the money. It's in the bank, and it's yours to then spend how you want. There's pros and cons to both. I love being venture-backed. The cons to, there's a ton of pros to being venture-backed. They're not as involved in the operational stuff. They don't tell you what to do on a day-to-day basis. There are no milestones. So the idea is like they trust you, and they're like, here's the money. You need to then turn this into either another funding round, or you can ship a game with this money. The downside, which is a totally fair downside, is that when the money from your venture VC funding runs out, that's it. There is no a publisher might be like, all right, well, you're late, which I was many times making games. You're like, you're late. All right, well, we'll extend the whatever. It's like, that's not how venture capital works at all. They're like, this is how much money you have. You spend it how you want. Like, you self-organize, set your own milestones, and then you have to make that money work. So that's the two different types there. And I think that, yes, I think that and people know this, there's a lot of, obviously, signs in the industry. There have been a massive number of layoffs over the last 18 months, which is obviously terrible. You hate to see that. The big publishers are shedding, and studios, but the publishers are shedding staff, right? And so what that means is that they're not in a position to spend and make a bunch of deals right now, and they haven't been for a while. And then venture capitals, and they're very heavily reliant upon financial markets. So when the markets are unstable like they are now, then they kind of pull back from investment. So yeah, it is a challenging time, I think, if people wanted to go out and get more money or start a studio now, it's a tough time, right? The industry, the thing that is, interesting from an academic level is that it's not like people are spending less on games. Every year, the money goes up. People are spending more and more on games, and that's great. $200 billion a year, I think it is, worldwide, an enormous amount of money, and that is increasing every year. It's a little more complicated because the trend over the last 10 years, though, is that there are a certain number of games that are consuming a massive amount of that money, though, right? So if you want to think about whether it's League or Fortnite or Minecraft or there are Roblox, there are games that don't lose their audience and in fact grow their audience. And so it's not as clear cut as well, there's more money going into games. Why aren't people just spending a fortune? It's there's a number of games that are consuming a large part of that audience as well. So that's it. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm just kidding.
Okay, so yeah, I mentioned that word risk. I think it's really what overshadows all of this. And in many ways, as you've just kind of laid out, the industry is just trying to de-risk, or at least the people that provide the funding for game development. They are trying to find ways to reduce that level of risk because of many external factors, the effect of what happened to the games industry during and after the pandemic, the high interest rates, everything we feel in our day-to-day life. They're less willing to take risk, and that is having very tangible effects on people like yourself trying to make studios at this kind of size, like 10, 20, 30 people. What have those kind of tangible impacts been for you? And then more widely, how does this change the kind of games that are going to get funded and get created ultimately?
Yes, I think that the business people in our industry probably get an unfair, like, you know, everybody's, this is a phrase, just this is being streamed, so I just want EA to know that I'm not saying this. But, you know, the old EA's evil, or whatever people say, right? I think it's a little bit, there's this sort of like really black and white view that a lot of people have, right? Of like, you know, publishers are evil, developers are great, and you know, maybe VC is evil, whatever it is. The business people are evil, the developers are great. And I think that that hasn't been my experience. Like, the developers are great, but I think that the best way to interact with publishers and VC is like they're just a manifestation of what the market is. Like, sure, they make mistakes, but they typically reflect like what people want, and so. I mean, I think that it's a case of you have to, if you're making a game, if you want to make a game and it's more artistic and you're not concerned with sales, that's fine, right? If you are concerned with like, hey, I'd like to make this into a going thing, right? What I would say always is like, to developers is like, you must think about your audience first. Like, you must identify who that is, right? I will say this as someone who has a pretty high profile failure to identify an audience, right? So we can talk about Midnight Suns in that regard. But I think that if people are making games and they want to be independent or they want to open a studio, you really have to have a pretty good sense of this is the opportunity that exists in the market. And I know those are business words, but games have to be a business if we want to sustain, if we want to protect the people who work for us. We want to be game developers as a career. It is a business, right? It's not, there's nobody just giving money away. And so identifying that audience and saying, this is the audience that's going to buy this game. It's not just going to happen. You have to think like, this is the audience for this game, and kind of focusing on that. I think that that's the most essential part of business. And so now you have to make that case to whether it's VC or whether it's publishers. It's like the first thing they're going to want to know is like, well, what's the audience? Like, the only way to de-risk something, there's a lot of risk in making games. And you're right, all they're trying to do is, like, it's not that they don't want to spend money. They want to spend money because they think they're going to make a return on it. They have to spend money to make money. But yes, you're right, their concern right now is like, well, what's the right bet? Where do I put my money? And so the most important question is like, sure, you can show them something awesome. They can get excited by a product, but they're always going to say like, well, who's going to buy this, right? And the nice thing is that games are so big now that there are so many audiences, right? For games from, you know, everything from maybe more cozy games. If people want to make mobile games, there are many sub-segments in the mobile games market. And then there's all the way up to like AAA, which I think is, that's a whole other talk, right? AAA and I think the difficulty in making something that's AAA. I think now the market is like, you can make a quadruple A game. Like, you can make Grand Theft Auto. The audience is pretty clear there. The tracker is pretty clear. You can make a God of War, and those are expensive bets. But you can spend, you know, people talk about like, oh, Grand Theft Auto may cost $1 billion. It's like, well, it doesn't. I'm just saying from the business standpoint, who cares, right? Like, they're going to make many times that, right? So good for them, right? But I think that if you're not one of those quadruple A games and you want to make an indie game, a single, double, whatever we want to call it, identifying an audience and saying, I know who my audience is, I know they're going to like this game. That's like the most important thing you do. That's how you can de-risk this for business people.
The reluctance you feel to hand this microphone back. So there's a couple of things I guess I'm worried about in that new dynamic. I think you're right that if you see this investment as a kind of a manifestation of the market, it's looking for bets that it feels it can get a good return on and a safe return. Oh, here we go.
Thank you.
Thanks, shout to JP. Yep. I guess one of my worries is if we're in this world of de-risking, the kinds of bets that they're going to be willing to take are a problem. Because like, let's look at something like the XCOM reboot, for example. Obviously, for the series, it proves itself. I don't know what the conversations were like when that idea was first put forwards. It's a risk to go back to a series like that years later, tactical games or I suppose there's a niche element to that. I'm part of that niche very proudly. My worry is if we take the risk away, like some of the interesting things that people are putting forwards that may be great games but aren't seen as safe bets fall by the wayside. And then the second concern, and I just like to hear if it's something you've had a read on or any experience with, like I feel like in a world of de-risking, a world in which less money is being thrown at different projects, there's an incentive there for publishers and investors to just provide worse deals as well, because like, well, where else are you going to go? Like, sign this.
100% true. Absolutely. It's a buyer's market for investors and publishers. That's very true. I think you raise a good point, which is that, again, I don't think, I know that like publishers, VC, they're not bad guys. There's not malice. However, they may not be ethical. They may not have like an ethical desire to like, oh, I want to make the best games, right? They do love, I mean, most of the people do love games, but you're right. It does become like, well, what games get made? Maybe a lot of people in this room would not call games, right? So it might be games that, you know, maybe some people don't like games with gotcha mechanics. Maybe some people don't like these mobile time waster games. And so, yeah, how do you get something like an XCOM made, which there's a clear audience for? I do think there are publishers that, and this is the rise of like the AA publisher. So Hooded Horse is a good example of somebody who's like, well, yeah, they target a very specific market. And they're like, those are the games they want to make is early access, tactical games, strategy games. And so I think Hooded Horse has had a lot of success by finding that opportunity. Like, that's the thing is I do think it self-corrects where if big publishers miss it or venture capital misses it, like that opportunity, there is still a huge opportunity there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's a challenge. Is the mistake the industry went down recently was chasing AAA, and it was like, well, games have to be massive, right? They have to be massive. And then if you make a massive game, there'll be a massive audience. And that has turned out to not be true for many, many AAA games made. Is that the math equation of if you have 200 people working on a game for 4 years, your break even is absurd, right? And people don't want to pay more than, you know, 50, 60 bucks for a game, which is fine. There's no like good, bad, whatever. The market is what the market is, right? And so the math you just sort of hit a wall with some of the math there. And so I think the industry, that's part of why it's also so difficult in the industry now is this transition from like, oh, AAA hasn't worked. You can do quadruple A if you have a really strong bet. But then now you see the rise of AA games. And so again, like a Pal World or a Manor Lords, or you can point to a lot of like really successful games that are $30 or $40 now. And I think that that's fun. I mean, I'm glad that games are going back to that. And those games seem to cater to like much more niche. And so it's good that those games exist. So that's, to me, like that spot of hope is that I think entertainment and games will become more personalized because the audience is so big. You can make a game that seems very, like Manor Lords is a good example of like, it's a very specific game. It's this game that if people don't know, it's, you know, it's like a town builder. It's a medieval town builder. And you wouldn't on the face of it you see like, okay, I don't realize why that's a big hit. But I think because the audience exists. And so like I think if people want to make games, if you find your audience, I think it will become more personal like that.
I think we're getting towards the end of the talk here. So something I wanted to just ask Jake for people in this room, I suppose. I think, in terms of the Q&A, have we got time to do that afterwards, or should we? Oh, amazing. Okay, yeah, if everyone hear that, yeah, the questions over here, and we should have 10, 15 minutes of that afterwards. So one final thing I wanted to ask you, for the people who raised their hands earlier who said they're game developers, I'm guessing from the games that have been shown here today, we're looking at teams mostly that are smaller than like 13 people, right? We're like a handful of people, maybe some solo devs. Is that kind of where a lot of people are at here? I'm seeing some nods. That is actually a very different proposition to the both your past at Firaxis, you know, a bigger studio with a huge publisher attached to it, or even Midsummer, which is 13 people, maybe more in the future, looking for investment in the millions. For people in that situation, solo devs, small teams, people that are able to do it, maybe part-time or as without paying themselves too much when they're working on early games. Very, very different like financial situation. You've been doing this for 25 years. What kind of advice would you have for people on that level of indie that are serving a different kind of game?
I think there's so with everything, right? There's nothing easy, right? I think that the challenge there is that as we all know, Steam was, let's say, the digital storefronts, right? But Steam mostly was originally viewed as this like it was a very good thing for indie games, right? So it elevated in games, gave place a marketplace that people, PC players would congregate at and say like, awesome, I like this. The problem now, of course, is that the number of games, small games, indie games, any kind of games being released on Steam is in the hundreds a day, right? It's massive. So there's a user acquisition, as they call it, like user acquisition, which used to be a mobile game problem. It's like, how do you even get this in front of people's eyes? There's starting to be a user acquisition problem on Steam and for indie games. And so again, I think that focusing on, if the team is smaller and they can make a smaller bet, making a personal, which is great because you can make a game that you're passionate about. This is the game that doesn't exist that I want to see in the world. That's like a lot of what small teams do. And I think that, again, finding that audience, acquiring those like eyes, I think is really important. And so the channels for doing that, I think there are different ways to do that. But I think, again, it's make sure that there's an audience for this game and then connect with them. But yeah, user acquisition is a challenge, I think, for indie games nowadays. And so, again, really quickly dialing in on, hey, this is our audience, this is where we think they hang out, and then sort of, getting people interested through those channels.
There's a really great talk at GDC from years ago about like how amazing like building a newsletter can be for like actually talking to your community. There are different ways of doing it. Some people do Discord, but when you're not relying on an algorithm, you're not relying on a platform that requires you to pay to speak to people. How important that can be for the long-term success of any studio.
A direct connection. This is one of the things that, again, good, but none of us want to give this is the thing, you don't really want to give your email to people, right? But it is a powerful, so from the game developer side, what Steam doesn't let you do is, and again, is this them keeping control? Is this putting them a barrier between? Some people may say, right, this is Steam like monopolizing control. They don't give you direct access to the people who wishlist. You don't even know who these people are who wishlisted your game, and that's a shame because some of those people may say, like, do not ever email me. That's fine. I hate emails too. But some of those people might want to see that newsletter. And that's how small games have to survive is like, do you want to see our latest progress? Like, you can't just put videos up on the Steam storefront. And so, like, if you could get direct access somehow to people interested, a newsletter, a recurring Patreon subscription for people. Like, I think that Steam's so great for indies, and in some ways it puts a wall between smaller developers that need direct access to their audience to say, like, if you're interested, I'm happy to tell you what the progress is. And there are challenges there, but getting direct access to potential players is like it would be a huge part of a small team for sure.
Cool. Well, we've got a few people lining up for questions. So please go ahead and introduce yourself. And there you go, Jake.
We've mentioned that this talk is being recorded and streamed, and I realize I never once actually said where. So if you're hoping to see this later or maybe share it with some friends, it's on the Enoch Pratt Library's YouTube page. So if you just go to there, I'm sure many of you probably could have figured that out, but just in case, definitely give us a look. And we have a bunch of cool author talks and other programs on there too. So, feel free to discover as you go.
Enoch Pratt's YouTube channel, the home of all the biggest game announcements. I've forgotten which way it goes. Take that, Jeff Keighley.
That's right.
All right.
We're only going to announce anything through Enoch Pratt's YouTube channel from now on. That's it.
Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Kyle. Thank you for the talk. It was really, really enjoyable. I had a question about the game you're working on. So The Sims very famously uses like Simlish, kind of non-English for dialogue, but the screenshots you showed were like very specific and dramatic. I'm just wondering how you're approaching, if you're able to talk about how you're approaching the dialogue in like a mechanical systems game and making it like
very
dramatic.
carefully. I'm sorry, I can't talk about specific features at this moment, and I know that's a bummer, but this is like the most we can do right now is share that. But yes, you're very insightful to ask that question, and it is a big focus on what we're doing.
Cool. Okay.
Was it a big decision to go for like actual language rather than Simlish? I guess maybe we can.
Yeah, I don't think you can tell a meaningful. I think that's what we identified as the opportunities. Like, what if your characters had a real story, and so you can't. We didn't feel you could do that with like Simlish and gibberish and stuff like that. So.
Afternoon, thanks for being here. It's a very informative talk. My name's Stevens Miller. I teach game programming at the University of Maryland in College Park. You mentioned
You're
something.
doing God's work.
My students wouldn't all agree with you. By the way, I would tell you most of you would get an A- from what I saw today. It's good stuff, so better than my students. One of the things that you mentioned that I don't feel very well positioned to advise my students on is this user acquisition issue. And you talked a little bit about Patreon, a little bit about Steam. If you have a publisher, I imagine they would help you too.
Yeah.
To get VC, it probably helps to be Jake Solomon. Not everybody's going to get a lot of VC.
Yeah.
I think with the shrinkage in the industry we've seen recently, that means for most of the indies starting now, it's going to be the bootstrap approach. Those people, like these folks, could do terrific work, very desirable games, very enjoyable. But if you don't reach that 1 out of every 10,000 gamer
Right.
Who wants to play your type of game, you're not going to make the sales you need to get back your investment. What do you think about other platforms like Crazy Games, Itch, things like that? Are those useful tools for indies to reach those people who want to play the particular game you've created?
Yes, yeah. I think that I think being open-minded about, how you reach them, what platforms, absolutely, right? I think that's absolutely. It depending on the game, right? Like, so depending on the game you're making, the audience you're trying to reach, then sure, right? I think that those skew younger, which is probably good. I mean, if you want to make a turn-based war game about the Civil War, then I don't know that Itch is the right place for it, but maybe it is. Maybe there's an untapped potential there. But yeah, no, I think that yes. I think what you're raising is the point that I would say for indie developers, like I learned this lesson, and it's a hard lesson to learn, and it used to not be true 15 years ago. The idea was that like if you make a good game, it'll all take care of itself.
If you build it, they will come.
Right. That is absolutely not true. There are many, many, many good games that have like, I don't know, 10 players, right? Like Steam is probably a graveyard of fantastic games. And so developers, I would just strongly, strongly encourage you from the beginning to build community, to find that community through the platforms, through different platforms.
Could you be more specific about which ones you have in mind?
Which platforms? I don't feel like I'm an expert on that. So being able to build that community through everything from like the big old ones like Reddit and what's now seeming old now, like Discord, right? Like those are great places to like find like-minded people interested in games. I think user acquisition is an issue that everybody that's making at least PC-based games is struggling with now, and mobile have been great at this. It's a different user. But I think it's like a new muscle that people are going to have to learn. And to be honest, like I don't feel like an expert at it either. But there are examples that I think people could look at. And maybe some of the most successful examples you can't take too many lessons from. But somebody like Paralives, which is a straight up life Sims, like they've had an incredible. It's a small team building a Sims competitor. They've had incredible success. And they have a Patreon, and they've been able to connect to people just by releasing screenshots and videos, and they've built like a large Discord, a large Patreon following, I would say like looking at other indie games that have been successful, seeing how they do it, I think is useful, but unfortunately, my direction is I'm probably not an expert in that area, so.
Can I add one thing to that really, really quickly? First of all, I think it's worth when you switch to saying like community building. I think that is just, I think using that term instead of user acquisition is probably a good muscle memory thing to start thinking about, because it probably influences the way in which you think about communicating with the people that want to play your games. It's community
Definitely
serving.
don't use the word user acquisition
Yeah.
to your community.
Yes.
It is the actual proper term, but yes.
Sure, I do, but I kind of mean almost like internally. It might even be I can imagine that slightly reframing the way in which people think about, the way in which you have that discourse. And the other thing I think you mentioned, I don't know whether the guy who asked the question was. You mentioned that like publishers can help with that in certain scenarios. There was an interesting talk by Rami Ismail recently where he talked about actually that can be true. But there are also examples where, and he pointed to Devolver as a potential case of this, where sometimes Devolver, people play Devolver games, right? The community is around the publisher, and it's like, that's not actually that helpful for you as a game developer. It means you're sort of linked to that publisher going forwards. Might not be the worst thing, but definitely one to consider if you're relying too heavily on the publisher to step in and create community for you. Anyway, there we go.
Howdy, my name's Greg, and dipping into Baltimore history and kind of regional history a little bit, this area for the past like 45 or so years has been kind of a crucible of both like LARPing as well as tabletop gaming. And as somebody who's LARPed in everything from fantasy, supernatural, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, shouts out to my boy Muckraker on stage.
I know you. Hi, Greg. How's it going?
But yeah, so basically, I'm wondering, I found actually Midnight Suns almost feel kind of like a Marvel parlor LARP. And so I was wondering if either live action role play or kind of less structured, less war gamey tabletop games, like stuff that's not relying on the grid in the way that say like XCOM does, or like D&D commonly does. I'm wondering if that kind of like emergent live action gaming has kind of influenced either your outlook on games like Midnight Suns or your upcoming project.
Yes. So actually, Midnight Suns started, the very first prototype for Midnight Suns was a tabletop version using HeroClix figures, so we could just represent the heroes and the villains. And it was a tabletop, like a gridless tabletop game. So yeah, it absolutely came from that. XCOM, the very first XCOM, I forget what the name of the game was. It was this like cyberpunk war gaming.
Wait, as in the XCOM that you made, are you talking about?
Yeah,
that's something you'll have to know.
What's that? Which one was it? No. Well, maybe it was that. It was. No, it wasn't Shadowrun. It was like this. I keep saying Necronomicon, which I know is not it. Necromunda. That's it. We actually played Necromunda when we originally were thinking about the mechanics of the original XCOM Enemy Unknown. And yes, the first version of Midnight Suns was a tabletop version using HeroClix figures. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Cool.
Great question.
Okay. All right, we'll move fast then. We'll answer very quickly. All single word answers. No. Maybe.
Hi, my name is Calvin Kumagai. I am half of a two-person indie game studio called Fun Freighter Games, working on a game called Scrap Seas. We've been picked up by a game agency, and we've been extremely unsuccessful in finding publishers, so I'm interested. I've never really heard people
Brother,
talk about,
join the crew. All right,
about
no, go ahead.
venture capital.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, how did you get connected to your venture capital funding, and is that even like a viable thing that somebody like me should even be like thinking about?
I mean, I think it depends. There are micro funds that would fund small projects, and they would absolutely listen to the pitch. There's not that many of them, so I don't even mind if you want to email me. I'm happy to like make connections there too. I mean, again, depending on the budget, if you could ship on a small amount, that's frankly the way the bets are moving. Is that I think funds are more interested in making bets on like smaller bets, right? More smaller bets. That's actually kind of the trend right now in VC. So there's the potential there. We have a friend who's a lead programmer on XCOM, Enemy Unknown. What's the name of the studio they just opened? Resurgent, all right? So that's another, again, we all come into the same place. Resurgent up in Hunt Valley, and they're venture backed as well for like a pretty small amount, I think. And so, yeah, that's definitely an opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Sorry, I said I'd answer fast and I didn't. All right.
Shout out to the Aftermath T-shirt here, by the way.
Yeah.
Love it.
Go to Aftermath, buy their merch, subscribe. Anyway, I don't work there. So this is a great talk. I'm really interested, this actually a little bit piggybacks on that because it's about venture capital. When you said what your one downside was, I was actually a little surprised because I don't know a lot about VC and games, but I have seen venture capital manifest in other industries.
Yeah.
And what seems to me to be the most common issue with it, not even to get into how people make VC bad, not to get into that, is just the expectation for ROI, the expectation for continued potential.
100%, yeah.
And I'm really curious, you're probably a little too early in the life cycle of this to know this, but I'm curious for you or in general, how that feels as a sort of a different pressure from, like you said, the model of just like, if the game ships and we get our money back, great, versus we have expectations that this bet will pay off tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold.
A very good point, and I should have highlighted that the reason that the venture-backed model is so investee friendly is because the expectation for venture capital is very different from publisher. So the important thing to know is that like venture capital, if they invest in any company, they don't get revenue sharing. They get no revenue. They get nothing, right? They only get money when your company either has a big either you have an IPO, right? You go public, or you get acquired by another somebody acquires your studio, or potentially if you have secondary rounds, and then they can sell their shares at that point. The only reason that venture capital works and can be so friendly and can give you so much money up front is yes, they need games. They don't even want a 10x return on their money. They're not looking for that. They're looking for like a 100x return on their money. So the reason why it's hard to get, and again, there are different funds that have different expectations. So I think a lot of times when it's smaller investments, they have lower expectations on return on investment. If you want a lot of money from venture capital, like a lot of money, a significant investment, you would have to be able to convince them that you are making a cultural defining product, right? So you're right. It's not the pressure, I'll be honest, the pressure's not there once you get the deal, right? Because you're like, all right, great. Now, if you need to raise funding in other rounds, you're still gonna have to prove that, right? So yes, you raise a point that I should have brought up, but yes, the venture capital to get real, like millions of venture capital dollars, their expectation is that you are going to lay out product for them that like defines, it's gonna be a significant mover in the industry, right? So they are looking for, as unreasonable as it sounds, yeah, they're looking for like, what's the next Minecraft? What's the next Roblox? And so you have to prove that like they can squint and go like, oh yeah, I see how that could happen. So yes, you were right to bring that up, is that venture capital is very different in that regard.
Thank you.
Very good question. I should have asked it.
Hi, Gino Gusio, MFA. I am trying to start a career as a narrative designer or a game writer. Do you have any advice on that? I'm not sure if you would.
I'm sorry. Any advice on what?
On being a narrative designer or a game writer.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think that, so there are a lot of ways that you can probably display that ability. I think that, again, what I would tell everybody is that like the easiest way to do it is to get involved in the mod community for a game that you really like. So if you want to do like a Baldur's Gate mod or something like that, it's a mod-friendly game that you can actually do narrative design on, which I think is a great track to prove like, hey, this is how, these are my skills as a narrative designer. I think that I've worked with some really fantastic narrative designers, writers. I would always say that if you really want to work in the industry, it's always like it's tough to get a job as a narrative designer right off the bat. There's always the opportunity of like, take a job at a studio, take like the hardest working people at studios, QA. Getting a job in QA, and then you'll always get the opportunity to like then showcase like narrative design abilities. I think that's always an opportunity there. But if you wanted to start solo, then I would probably say like getting involved in, if a game has a very active mod scene, that's a very good way to like typically developers are aware of that stuff too. So if there's a game you particularly like that you just want to work on, getting involved in the mod scene for that game is a good start.
Thank you very much. I got to
Mhm.
go start up Baldur's Gate 3 again.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Ben. I was wondering, you brought up like defining your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how like in the modern day, you kind of define who will be playing your game. Like my dad's aunt plays Among Us, and my
Yeah.
grandpa plays Diablo 4.
Yeah.
So how do you?
Good Lord, we have grandpas playing Diablo 4 before we got GTA 6. It's crazy. What a world. Yeah, I think that, I mean, you raise an interesting point. A game like, so party game, like, let's say, you know, I don't know, Fall Guys or Among Us or something like that, they're different, right? But they have this really broad appeal. They have like easy to learn mechanics. I mean, I think with games like that, you can define your audiences, you know, maybe not everyone, but like close. Again, I think when you think of audience, you think of like demographics, right? So you say like, okay, what is the age probably? Like typically there'll be like an age grouping, and some games can spread pretty wide, like Diablo, I guess, for example. But yeah, I think that's thinking about age, thinking about what other games that people play. So like the Venn diagram of like what games, if you're making a game, what other games do those people play? And as gamers, we played lots of, you know, different games, but knowing if I like, let's say, Diablo 4, then you can probably get a good sense of what game I would be open to. And that's, again, probably the start of building community as opposed to user acquisition, which is finding
Patreon.
games that you think people who like games like that would be open to whatever game you're making. So.
Okay. Like just name like if somebody likes a game A, then they'll like.
They would be a target, right, for game B, right? So like, yeah, if they like this game, and it's a gross thing that you have to do when you talk about the business side of things is, you know, people be like, well, what game's it like? And you're like, oh God, you're like, it's like a piece of my heart and it's my soul, and I've thought of nothing else for 2 years. And they're like, yeah, but is it like Call of Duty or what, kid? I don't got much time here. And you're like, all right, fine, it's Stardew Valley meets Call of Duty, okay? That's what it is.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jax. Okay. So more about the community stuff. You came from Firaxis, which has like a very established and dedicated fan base.
Yep.
Especially like XCOM, Civ.
Yep.
Now that you're in Midsummer, now that you're like an indie developer, brand new, making your first game, like what does that community building look like from the other side, where you had to build it from the ground up rather than you coming into a franchise with a base already?
Yeah, I would say it's actually been really refreshing at the development side of things. Like being, so the difference, at least on the development side of things, is that we're so small compared to where most of us came from. Like our producer, Grant, he came from Maxis. You know, he was a director on The Sims, and so in Firaxis, same thing, like hundreds of people. Maxis, hundreds of people. Now we're 13. And it's true, there's no fan base for Midsummer, but to some extent, that's not to be Pollyannish about it, but it is like, it's actually very freeing because the kind of game we're making is very different from anything else. It's probably the reason why I left Firaxis, was that I didn't feel like the kind of game that I wanted to make made any sense at Firaxis.
Got tired of people asking you for XCOM remake.
I never get tired of that. That means that, you know, at least I'm relevant, you know, in that regard. But yeah, I think that to some extent it kind of has to be this way because of the game we're making. Doesn't make sense at Firaxis. It doesn't make sense anywhere, frankly, except for, and I hope that's what indie developers feel, is that the game they're making doesn't make sense anywhere else, right? And so it's difficult, right, to build a new audience, as we've talked about, build community, build a new audience. But to some extent, it's it's the right thing for the kind of game we're building. It's definitely the right environment for us. Is that there's no preconceived expectations. I'll again, and I know we're going to end here, but I would say that like my first experience with like people's preconceived notions about what we should be doing. My first negative experience was on Midnight Suns, right? Make Midnight Suns. You announce it like, all right. Then there was like a pretty big segment of the XCOM announce. It was like, boo, and I was like, what? So it's kind of nice to when you making a game like this, either my name or my team has like I'm so blessed, but it does have baggage, right? And so it's like, hey, you start a new studio. This is where you can be like, look, I'm not making those games anymore, and so now this is probably the right way to do it. So.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer.
Oh. Well, yeah, I think that sounds like that's as much time as we have. Sorry that I spent ages talking about Firaxis. It was always going to happen. But yeah, thank you to Jake for agreeing to.
Thank you to Chris. Thank you.
Me. Yeah.
Thank you to the unsung heroes of the public
Yes.
library system.
Always gets the biggest reaction. That's the lesson. Yeah,
You gotta learn to pander, man. You gotta learn to pander.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Both Jake and Emily from the Pratt team are doing an amazing job putting this on. I have not been to a games event in such a beautiful space. Like, there's natural light. If you play free games, they give you like a free drink. Like, there's bribery. I'm a huge fan. And yeah, thank you.
What kind of
all.
drinks?
I think it's Bubba tea, isn't it, outside?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. You're gonna lose the audience right at the end.
I'll be terrible by game 10. I'm like, oh.
But yeah, thank you all for coming along, and I think we're going to stick around for a little bit after if anyone has the questions that didn't get answered. Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you to the library. Let's give another cheer for the Pratt Free Library.
All right.